Good afternoon. How are you doing?
Good. Uh, Different, right? Probably have hair.
You have hair.
uh,
Let me fix this
yeah.
because I want to. There we go. Perfect. Yeah,
All
you do.
right.
Do you usually have your hair short?
Yeah. Buzz cut.
Oh, well, it looks good. It looks good.
2020 New Year, who knew me? No, just kidding.
Well, it's a new year, new everybody. No matter what you thought
Oh yeah.
year was going to be, this is what it is.
Yes. 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 Yes.
How have you been doing?
I've been good. I think like now I've been working from home, my office. This is like a 40 hours of my week.
40 hours
Yeah.
you spend. That's a long
Yeah.
time sitting down
Yes.
in the same room, not being, not being as active, I would imagine.
hmm It's a little bit different. I mean, it has its pros and cons regarding, like access to like, food, access to, if I do want like rest in between, or maybe in between clients, I find myself like doing some push-ups or some pull-ups that I have a bar.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, but I feel like a little overworked. Not gonna lie.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine. I was just like thinking about how many hours I'm putting in. It as I like actually looked at it, I'm really not putting in as many hours because we're not traveling and all that, but it does feel so much more draining.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So, self-care is very important. Things that I tell my clients is what I try to implement on my own.
right, right. Well, we're going to definitely get to that because I think that that is like imperative in terms of just being a human and especially being a human in this day and age. But why don't you share a little bit about yourself, how we kind of know each other, and then I want you to tell everybody what train we're on. So,
So my name is Danny Sanchez. I've been in the field for about 8 years now. I started working at a day treatment program in the Bronx, treating people with like schizophrenia, severe psychotic disorders. Then from there, I went to substance abuse, worked there for a little bit in Midtown Manhattan. And then the last, I think 4 years, I was with Victoria as my clinical supervisor. It was a great experience. I feel like
you don't have to say that.
we had a great conversation, which is really, really missed. I'm not gonna lie. Um, from informational to like podcasts to books and articles, I felt like I always left with something, to look forward to, like explore more. So yeah, I definitely.
Well, that's a part of the reason why I'm doing this is that like we have had such great conversations, and I feel like just there's so many things in terms of well, therapy one, but just like everything that's going on in the world and especially right now, which I'm sure we'll be getting to
Yes.
later. But
So
conversations
I
are
heard, I guess we're on the A train. What, heading
great.
uptown?
Oh,
Downtown to Rockaway.
okay. Wait, we're coming from
The T.
downtown.
Uh,
What part of the downtown are we? Are we in Brooklyn? Are we in Manhattan?
no, Queens, on the Queen side already, reaching like Rockaway.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Love
Yes.
Rockaway. Okay, and then we're heading all the way uptown to
To let's see, on the west side, let's do like Midtown.
Midtown. Oh, I thought you were
Midtown, Uptown, maybe towards the Central Park area.
gonna. Okay, that sounds good.
I also like to organize in the community, empower the community. Yeah. What I haven't been organizing lately, especially because of quarantine.
Mm,
Since then, I've just been like focusing on myself, mental health, you know, supporting where, because it's also important to think about like where our money goes to, right? Like, So supporting how I can and where I can.
There's always so much to kind of like talk about in what you just said about supporting and trying to. So what are you doing now? How has it shifted?
It shifted more to like personal knowledge, like me trying to read a lot, catch up, rereading old articles, rereading old books, through a different lens, and supporting like the mutual aid programs that supporting like grassroots organizations, um, that are doing the groundwork, supporting like legal aids for the protesters that have been arrested or disappeared, however you want to see it, kidnapped.
Yeah.
Uh, so that's what it's been looking like lately. And just last week though, I broke the quarantine and to go to a protest. I
Mhm.
have been like a little bit cautious on like attending large gatherings, due to the fact that I have like old folks in the house.
Right. Yeah.
And take care. So that's what's been holding me back from really being boots on the ground, kind of organizing,
Hmm.
thinking it's not only me. Like if I think I'll survive. I don't know, my old folks.
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of people have had that experience where they want to be involved, but they're doing the responsible thing for themselves and taking care of their health so that it doesn't impact other people. But yeah, it's just so complicated, right? Like how conflicted I would imagine you particularly feel, given that all these things are so important to you and you've been working on them for a long time. You've been active in the community, trying to make significant changes in society, and then through grassroots, organizations. So I can imagine this has got to be conflicting for you.
It is. It is. It's one of the things that I like. One of the mantras that I repeat, especially while I meditate, is like I'm exactly where I need to be.
Mm.
At the moment. So it kind of like grounds me, brings me back to the here and now, which I think is essential in these tumultuous times.
Does that kind of like ground you and make you feel?
It makes me realize that if I'm taking a break and I'm stepping back, or practicing some stillness, it's like it just brings me back to like present, to be here with my body, to appreciate what I have around me. um Mostly like that, like bringing awareness of what I already have and like what I need to handle here in my household,
Hmm.
um and being grateful and mindful about here and now, like boom, I'm here, I'm healthy, I'm moving, I'm working, by being burnt out, but I'm still some form of income coming in.
Right. Well, and also impact too, right? The impact that you're still making on people's lives, even though you like to do it on a bigger scale. We all kind of want to do it on a bigger scale. Well, hopefully on some level, but being able to kind of take that step back and be okay with taking that step back.
Yeah, I think that you just said it. Like it's being okay with stepping back. I think a lot of people in the movement and even in our field feel like sometimes tremendous guilt, or feeling like, like the imposter syndrome, they're not doing enough. And yeah, so I think it's important to just bring it back.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. Like, I think a lot of people do end up feeling a lot of guilt, especially if they're not doing everything that they think they should be doing. And we're always thinking that we should be doing this and should be doing that. And that impacts our mental health on such a profound level because that sense of like guilt doesn't actually allow you to put yourself as a priority. Because, there are just some people who, unfortunately, their functioning is limited.
No, because a lot of our communities, especially like marginalized, right, they lack the awareness of what is available, like the resources.
Well, I mean, this goes to probably something that we should be exploring a little bit more is like, taking care of people, right? And
Mhm.
that there are marginalized communities and people that for no no fault of really anybody in lots of ways, are born certain ways or also have born into a world and a culture in which they are not treated as if they're human. And I mean, there's just so many different ways of framing all of this. And how do you support, take care of, and also advocate for people who are in those situations? And I think that you definitely have made that a huge part of your life and what you've done for a long time. What was it for you? Because we all have like a personal story as to why, and we might not, like, I didn't come to a realization about the way I thought about things and how I feel about what I'm doing in the world until every day feels like an epiphany. Even today, which we'll talk about later, I learned something about why I'm doing what I'm doing and how much of an impact my life, my family, my culture, like everything has impacted what I do now and will continue to impact me. I'm just wondering kind of what and how you choose to kind of express that, right?
Mhm. So I would say, like, I think my organizing started in 2011 during Occupy Wall Street. Um, However, I would say that I think I grew up in an environment that, my parents did allow me to raise questions and to not in a no oppositional form, not in a rude way, but I think they were really like open to like, I think my mom would always tell me, um, you any questions regardless, just come and ask me. I will tell you the truth, right? Regarding sex, drugs, whatever. um Come and I will tell you, do not trust your friends, like they. So I think, so that inquisitive mind, right? And I also, some teachers in high school would also, that critical thinking was really really big, right? Like the essays we. However, I feel like I've always been like that inquisitive mind. Like I remember when September 11 happened, I was like, no, no, there's something behind this. And looking up, right, I was 14 when it happened, September 11th. I'm aging myself.
That's okay.
Uh, and I remember looking up like Nostradamus and like, oh, he predicted it. So I always had that like inquisitive mind. And then when Occupy Wall Street happened, I saw a video from the group Anonymous, calling out for, for the people. It was like a call to action. Like,
Mhm.
so I was like, this is just anonymous. Like, I don't know if you know what anonymous is. It's like this, a secretive, like, hacker group, that, they, some of them are really responsible for like WikiLeaks and like, gathering information and like, like whistleblowers,
Okay.
right? Um, So they made out a call, and I was like, and then I saw on the news that thousands of people were down in Wall Street, and I was like, oh my God, they answered the call. The revolution is here. so, I went to Occupy Wall Street, but I have my own opinions about that, right? I went, wasn't really engaging. I went down there without knowing anybody. I went there for like 3, 4 days
Okay.
for Occupy Queens College.
Mhm.
And then that's when I ran into, like, I guess you could call like the so-called like hard left of the campus. I feel like I remember the first meeting. Somebody was like, everybody you see here is probably the hard left on campus. And we tried to like organize there. So I focused myself once with one group to like create like an occupation in Queens College or like a walkout, but it failed. And then, then I got involved in the bigger student movement, which was all around CUNY, which was a different political line than the people that were organizing the walkout and the Occupy Queens College, and then so on. Like, and I started educating myself and just understanding the reasons like why my family had to come from Colombia to the United States, and understanding that history, that it's not here, and that we all have like a shared history of struggle. And I think that's if we go into it, I would not consider ever myself like a nationalist. not even like a Colombian nationalist, right? I'm definitely into like internationalism, right? Because all the struggles from Puerto Rico to Colombia to the Philippines to Palestine, right? We're all connected. So I think that's how I started. And then eventually, you know, you grow to your own political line, and then you start noticing that, hey, even among us activists and revolutionaries, there's competing schools of thought.
Right.
Well, that could be a whole nother episode.
As humans, we're so, our beliefs, like you said, families from Colombia, and there were things that happened that have influenced your family and also your beliefs, and being able to kind of like see some similarities and struggles about just being humans, right? And the human race, and how we are really also trying to like, I mean, this world is, it's crazy, and it's also crazy about how we don't end up, kind of just to get back to that point of taking care of each other in the way that we would hope that we would, right? And I think that it's so complicated because we're also in a struggle with ourselves about how we take care of ourselves, right? So it's a parallel and a projection that gets like kind of acted and enacted out and on so many different levels. So it's complicated, right? We know that, oh, I don't know, smoking a cigar, not to say that I smoke cigars, is not good for me, right? I'm a wellness like practitioner. I know eating those potato chips are not good, but then you end up like fighting within yourself, like what's the short-term and long-term benefits of these activities, right?
There's that dopamine.
Is that dopamine, right? Exactly. And I think it's also prevalent in our society, and how when you really look at it and you take a step back, that's why it's just so interesting and so conflicting, and this is kind of who we are as humans, and how do we move forward in terms of being the best, and taking care of ourselves, and taking care of each other, but recognizing that there's a balance within all of that. You get involved in becoming a therapist with all of did you decide it prior, or was this after?
I started at going to school at City College, you know, second generation uh, uh, of immigrant parents, right? I remember going to college with that whole expectation of study computers. You're going to college not for yourself, but, you know, because the expectations that come, right? You know, you have to make it out. You have to be the professional of the family. And then I struggled with my own mental health issues. My first year of college at City College, I struggled with depression, and then I decided, I dropped out. I took like a break for about a year, and then I went back to Queens College. I transferred to Queens College. It was more accessible. Um, and then I started taking psychology. Well, I was fulfilling my liberal arts still, and I took psychology, and I was like, oh, I really get this, and I'm getting like, A's, A's, A's. And I was like, oh, you know what? However, I remember my 101 professor. I remember writing about her for a fellowship, and she thanked me later. But shout outs to Dr. Statuka, Canadian. She was like, but if you're gonna go into this field, you have to keep going. You can't just stop with a bachelor's, because there's really nothing you can do with that.
That's so true.
You have to go straight into PhD or master's. However, so I got accepted into like a fellowship in CUNY that they were supposed to. It was called the Pipeline Program. It was for minorities, underrepresented, so that they could become professors, eventually like PhDs. But what happened was, so my thesis was on social psychology. I was studying adult attachment and romantic relationships. That's what I wrote my thesis on. But then at the same time, I got accepted to uh, a government program for a government job. So I was like an intern, but the program was called literally Stay in School program. As long as you were in school through masters, through undergrad, masters, even PhD, you had a job, guaranteed. Like that was just their only requirement. Very flexible. All right, so my senior year came, I'm finishing. I'm like, you know what? I actually want to like just work and let me get my money. And I remember telling my manager, and she was like, she started crying. She's like, you don't want to work in this office. You who have like such ideas. Like she started crying. I
Wow.
don't want to work here. Like I know, I understand, financial stability. It's a federal job. But you don't belong here. She told me. I was like, shit, man. Like what do I do?
Mm-hmm.
Um, because now it's senior year, all the deadlines for the PhD programs were already done. So I was panicking. And a friend was like, oh, go into mental health counseling. Look, it's very practical. You could. So I applied and I got accepted.
Mm-hmm.
As a month later, after I got accepted, um, I was like, yeah, now I could stay in school, work, and still, pay my tuition. Obama cut the program nationwide.
Wow.
I lost my job, but at least I had my school. Yeah. And then during my first semester, which was interesting, I got called back for the federal job, but at the same time, I got an offer to start my day treatment program
Okay.
or security. And I went with my career.
Mm.
And thankfully, like, the degree that I have, it is a practical degree.
I have to say, we are so lucky that you chose your career over security, because that's not an easy thing, right? Especially coming from, immigrant families. As they're here, they're coming to make a better life for themselves and for their children, right? In a sense of security. And I've heard this on with so many people whose families have come here as immigrants, is like they want their children to have that sense of security. So they think of doctor, lawyer, engineer, like those are the jobs that give that sense of security. Now computers. So it's such a challenging thing, because you want to be able to have that sense of security, but it's almost a false sense of security, right? It's because it's not expanding your sense of what you could be and what you could do in the world.
Mhm.
So I love
Yeah.
that you chose your career instead of that sense of security.
Which is difficult at times, especially in organizing circles, because I feel like the left also attracts, because safe spaces, true revolutionary spaces, we try to combat ableism, sexism, any transphobic, homophobic ideas. So people come to these spaces, because organizers, I feel like, you know, I can't generalize, but we tend to be on that side, right? Uh, uh, the more compassionate, which makes it troubling a lot, because as a therapist, you kind of could see sometimes how mental health could come into the organizing space.
Hmm.
And if somebody has maybe untreated serious issues, you could see how it could affect the organizing, right? Um, so that whole idea of like trying to switch off as a therapist, sometimes it's hard in organizing spaces.
I could imagine. Yeah. Yeah, because you can see things in
Mm.
ways. And I would also imagine too, like just things. I always have this idea of like you can see why people are acting or reacting the way that they are, given what you know about their history, or if you see their behavior and the way that they think. And this is what, why I think therapy is so helpful. You can make conjectures about what their history was like, right? You could see somebody who has probably had a history of trauma, or who needs like to have this sense of control, and like is maybe a little more authoritative, and how that comes out. I mean, you know, there's so many different ways in which we see the world now, and a lot of it has to do with like, I think what you said, and thank you so much for kind of disclosing your own mental health issues, because you know, we're just so much more sensitive to that given our own experience in many ways. And sometimes we don't even realize how our own experiences have impacted our ability to see things in a way that other people don't see. And I guess, I mean, I don't know if you get this a lot, but I get this a lot, like as a therapist, when you tell people what you do, there's almost like there two reactions. And I talked about this with my friend Omar, who did the first therapy. Yeah. So you remember where it's like they want to, like they want to, like, oh, they want to know about themselves, or they kind of like want to run away in some ways. What's been your experience with that, given that you've been in different spaces?
It's the first one, like what Omar said. You know, y- um, they get a person who is actively listening. You know that we do the nonverbals. You know, it comes automatically already. You know, tilting the head, listening, like being engaged. So it opens that. I mean, my experience is that I've started noticing, I mean, some of my friends, I mean, are taking into consideration and asking me if I have the space, like the emotional space,
Mm,
tell me something deep. You know, and I appreciate that. I don't hold it against the people that really don't know, but I try to make it like known. I do also make it aware that they could approach me, but just ask first, right? Like, um, other people is like, don't judge me. You're judging me. You're analyzing me.
yep.
First dates would be like they'll drop a whole their trauma history on me, and I'm like, I just met you, like, like I don't, and trigger warning here. Sexual assault is like a big one. Be careful, right? And not trauma bond.
Describe trauma bonding. What does that
Well,
mean?
trauma bonding is like when we have our own issues and we could identify it when we talk with somebody else, so we feel this sense of connection.
Hmm.
They know what we're talking about. Yes, they know what we feel, but it's built behind trauma, right? Behind like unresolved issues that
Hmm.
later can come out in the relationship. If it goes on, it could serve also like for manipulation, like on one end, attachment issues. What is it? Dependency, codependency.
Right, codependency. Yeah, yeah. That's a really good point. I guess just because this has been the book that I've been reading, but as I'm reading the molecule more, what keeps on coming up, especially when they have the part about love, that's like the first chapter. That's what they're talking about, is trauma bonding. That there is something about the dopamine connection that happens with somebody when you're in a relationship with them. And when you, like, this idea of like falling in love and falling like so quick and love at first sight and deeply in love within the that person just gets me, there's something happening with your dopamine receptors that is getting triggered based on your past history of, probably oftentimes it's a parental figure where there are some familiar traits and characteristics that you're attracted to that haven't been really quite like resolved. And when we say resolved, it's like it never really gets resolved. I mean, I don't know how you feel about this, but this is how I feel. It's like you just have to build an awareness that you are attracted to this certain kind of person. And in that awareness, when you feel that like excitement, or that oh my god, this is the one or the person, especially early on, that's when you have to look at your reaction and say, oh, wait a minute, what is really going on here? What is it about this person? What is this triggering for me? And it's triggering, again, that dopamine, which is very exciting and very the molecule more. It's a desirable, right? It's a great feeling to have that feeling. And so that's exactly why you like self-awareness and understanding what other people also too could trigger in you is so important, especially when dating.
I'm also reading right now. I'm almost finished, basically finished. It's called The Healing Rage, a Woman's Guide, I think it's called, by Ruth King. She's like a
Okay.
black like psychotherapist. Um, at first, let me tell you though, at first I was a little apprehensive, right? And then I had to like question my own self, right? And that had to do with my own patriarchy. I was like, why would I get a book that's just, it's like a guide for women, like practicing healing, I think it was called.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, but then I was like, nah, you know what? There's things that here, and while reading it, I'm like, whoa, like men need to read this too. It's not only like, the book is all about, they use the pronouns she, her all the time throughout the book. But I can see how, so it talks about how rage disguises itself through like 6 functions. And but yeah, it's pretty interesting. But it talks about also like being aware of when we attract people.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what are they bringing? Who are they reminding us of? What trauma? And don't get it confused, right? Trauma is not only physical.
Mm-hmm. Well, a lot of it is emotional. It's deprivation. Like you
Mhm.
mentioned before, attachment stuff, trauma, attachment issues based on trauma from emotional neglect and deprivation. I mean, it's so complicated. And that's why, again, like, having the self-awareness and being in therapy is so important to understand that, because we don't really quite recognize that, because we can't see it. Like there's just we have a limited like perception and viewpoint. We think we can see things, but we really like have a limited viewpoint. I mean, not to talk about books all the time, but there's another really good book called Insight, which is about self-awareness, and how most people think that they're self-aware, but very few actually are. And the key determining factor is really what other people say you're doing, and like their objective observations of what they see you doing. And a lot of times, we don't want to hear it. Our defenses go up, right? We know this, called resistance in therapy. And so we're very good at understanding that concept, but we fall for it all the time too, because our defenses are up. It's just part of being a human, right?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
know, right? You don't want to even get into
As therapists, I think, and we always have to, one, and first of all, be weary. This is what I tell my clients: be weary if you find this therapist who says that they don't believe that, or they don't even mention it, that therapists have therapists, right? I always try to like make that disclaimer in the initial session, and you can see kind of they relax. They're like, oh, okay, this guy, okay, he's aware that not therapists are all perfect, right? But yeah, or I mean, but we're gonna get sidetracked. The whole idea that we can't feel anger or get upset because we're therapists and we're supposed to know how to control our emotions.
right,
Uh,
right.
I
Yeah.
mean, I think it just has to do with the reaction, right? All emotions are valid.
Hmm.
All emotions. It's the reaction that's the problem, the behavior.
Right. Right. Well, you know how I like to put it actually is that we have a trigger. So self-awareness is understanding what those multiple triggers are in our lives, and then we have an automatic reaction, which could be a psychological defense. It could be an emotional like reaction. I mean, actually, it's a mix of all of that. So, and then we have our ability to respond, right? So I can get angry about something in therapy with a patient, and I know that I'm getting angry, and I say, okay, well, how do I want to respond? What does it mean for me? Like, why am I getting upset? What is this feeling that I'm experiencing? And it's so crazy because it's like you were doing so many different things in the session with somebody, and they don't really kind of know that. Although sometimes, I think because our nonverbal communication with our, the different muscles that we're moving that we have even no idea. Like, you know, I know that I am pretty expressive at times. So when somebody says something and I could feel like a reaction, it's, you know, they probably experience it too. And it's being able to kind of talk about that in some ways, given if it's appropriate, right? Because it also could be your own countertransference to what somebody is experiencing, and not necessarily just transference. So how have you been kind of taking care of yourself then during this time? I know that, you know, you said that you have a pull-up bar and you're doing push-ups.
Uh, I ride my bicycle. I've been telling. I think it was one of your posts that you said about water and the tranquility and like the anti-aging thing, and I've really been doing that, right? Like, and I tell because I'm on. See, we used to work in Bushwick, right? You and I. Well, East Williamsburg, but that doesn't exist. Let's like stop that thing.
Right.
Bushwick,
Bushwick.
Bushwick or Bed-Stuy, whatever you want to call it, either or where, but it's not even where. It's Best or Bushwick. Um, and now I'm on the South Brooklyn though, like where we are. Like it's the I could walk to the water edge, so most of my clients are from that community.
Okay.
I tell them, and please, like, especially after I saw your video, I was like, hey, look, you live by so and so, you live by Marine Park or something, whatever. Go stare at the water. I want you to put your timer on your phone. And clients come back, oh my God, 10 minutes is so much. I'm like, it's start. Just like sit there. And I'm like, but that, so I live on the coastal line.
Mm-hmm.
So I do go try to at least 3 to like 5 times, even sometimes 6 days a week. I go riding minimum 15 miles on my bicycle. Purpose heading specifically towards water spots
Mm-hmm.
and just stare at the water, meditate, yoga. The being here in this chair for 9 hours, 8, 9, 1 hour of lunch, but your lunch you go eat sitting, then
Right.
lay down, so you're really not moving. So stretching, meditating. When I do meditate in the mornings, I set my intentions. You know, let me be present for my clients. But definitely stretching, um, the being next to water, riding my bicycle, and going out for like nature walks. Like literally, like I've been like, you know, in this, if you have the means, you know, I've been like upstate a lot now, finding these great parks that New York has to offer.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I've been doing: journaling,
Right.
reading. Yeah.
So really, it sounds like slowing down, taking care of yourself, moving, being near nature. I mean, it's, yeah, it's so important. The whole water thing, I learned recently that there are ions that are released from the water that actually have a very calming and soothing effect. So there's, I mean, this is like, we're all energy. There's all so much going on. And again, you know, being by water intuitively makes so much sense. So it's amazing that you know, you're doing that like as an intervention for your patients, because that's not something that people probably would kind of think about and even recognize that it would affect their, you know, mental health and well-being. But I know for me, like, you know, being, by going to the ocean, going to Far Rockaway, uh, is so soothing, and it's like one of the highlights of the summer. And I almost like cry, like out of everything for COVID, almost cried when I heard that the beaches might be shut down for the summer. That was when I was like, okay, this is ridiculous. But I mean, it was selfish in many ways, but I just know that, like, for me, the water is such a healing space. Even though, and it's so funny that you're mentioning this, even though I live in Hell's Kitchen, which
Mm-hmm.
by the pier, by a pier, it's not too far away, and there's a river there. And I was like, Victoria, you can, and this just recently happened to me, by the way. I was like, you could go outside the pier and just be by the water and just smell the water and be around it, and you're gonna still get the same benefits. Epiphany, like mind blown. I was like, ah,
And here's
ah.
the water. A little.
Yes, very soothing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know what's interesting? 2 weeks ago, because I have clients that are kids, and they're all into this Disney movies. And one they always love to mention, I don't know why. So it's Frozen, right? Frozen one.
Yes.
But in Frozen 2, there's this character called Olaf, like the little snowman. He says something that really stuck with me, and I've been like, whoa, and it's true. There was a line that he says, "Water has memory."
Mm,
It made sense. Like, yo, water's been right around, and it just keeps like going around the Earth, like for 4.6 billion years. If that's how old the Earth is.
right.
But
Olaf even said, as they're going into the forest, oh, I have a feeling this is going to change us. Like this is going to be like life changing, or I can't remember exactly what the quote was, but there was so many different metaphors in that movie. And even now, I mean, just to go back to the whole thing that happened with the revolution I can't remember exactly, but where in order to protect themselves, they they impacted nature and other and native the native community there, right? That there was something about the dam. I can't even remember, but do you remember?
in the movie,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, that's what it was.
The whole
Yeah,
premise of the movie was like really kind of about a reckoning, right? A reckoning with with history and trying to recognize the impact that like constant decisions of people who were self-motivated and self-oriented and not necessarily thinking about the impact on that's where we are here now. So to get back to the
mhm.
uprising is the word that you're used, right? The revolution, the protests. What have you noticed about like the patients that you're working with and some of the issues that you see kind of popping up, whether it's like personal, systematic?
My new clinic, there is definitely a difference in demographics and socioeconomic status.
Mm-hmm.
From here, South Brooklyn to Bushwick.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but what I'm noticing is there's a lot of trauma, right? A lot of my clients are like Eastern European now. Um, it goes like if I could break the demographics from like what I have most is like Eastern Europeans, then African Americans, and then like Latinos. Um, what I'm noticing a lot is parents feeling overwhelmed with their children being home, um, lack of resources, um, the financial insecurities. I have clients who have lost like father, husband to COVID,
Mm,
so grief. Um, but I think a lot of trauma here in this clinic. That's what I've been trauma, and then anxiety. Clients are struggling with. And then this is when I challenge them. We're like, I can't do anything because of COVID. I'm like, let's talk about what you can do, right?
different from where we were working at Bushwick,
Um,
Bushwick Bed-Stuy.
I think it's well there we have people that are living either at the poverty line or below poverty line,
Mm-hmm.
right? So there's also a lot of like community violence that goes into play, right? Police oppression, the oppression in schools,
Mm,
right? And like the difference between like the high schools that are around there versus like the high schools around other parts of New York City. Um, and substance use, right? I mean, here I also see substance use, but in Bushwick it was more like that recovering addicts from like hardcore, like crack and heroin.
mm-hmm.
Here's we see like people from cocaine, alcohol, it's the class.
Right.
Mhm. But nonetheless, though, I always try to bring it back to, hey, you know, these insecurities are on a systemic issue, right? And I try to mention that it is capitalism that burns us out. We have to work so much. You know, it is because of patriarchy tied into capitalism that causes like to have abusers. Racism, right? How they perpetuate it, right? Because again, like I said, like a lot of these, I have most of my clients are like Eastern European. Um, yeah, challenge that in Bushwick where they kind of live it. They're the ones, yeah, I know the system is messed up. Yeah,
Yeah.
they just the other ones like you have to say it. In Bushwick, it's like they're aware of it.
Right.
They're aware of what's happening a
Yeah.
little bit.
Headwinds and tailwinds, right? You should know this for riding your bicycle, right? Like it's easier to go with the wind than to go against the wind, right? So the tailwind is the wind that like helps you, propels you forward, and the headwind is the one that like is the resistance. So because I mean you know my background, so I'm half Puerto Rican and half white, whatever that means, half.
Mhm.
So my mom is like mixed white, you know, from upstate New York. They had five of us, my parents, and I have a younger brother who's about a year younger than me, and he is. One would call him typically Puerto Rican, right? Look, you know, right? Darker skin, curly hair, uh, features, right? One would look at me and say I look typically white, and I always remember this, and this is such a like just a crazy situation that happened. Like fell in love with or was really interested in this white girl, and somehow I don't know her mom found out whatever it was and said I don't want you dating that spick. Now my brother and I have the same parents, and I remember thinking if I tried to date her son, would she have had that same reaction? Probably not. Blue
Yeah.
eyed, you know, yeah, I got curly hair, but you know, lots of white girls have curly hair. So I witnessed that, and I remember even, you know, thinking as we're talking about like kind of building awareness, all these things like you don't really recognize all the experiences that you've had that your brain is like, huh, that's interesting. But that was like the like in your face experience. So that tailwind is that here I am accepted in the majority of people and culture because of what I look like. And my brother, which is a which would be like a headwind given our culture in many ways, is against upper resistance, more resistance. And I could see this in so many areas and spots in my life. Just even,
And I think it's our job as therapists to try to point that out, you know. Our job is very political. And we can't, we have to be careful in not reproducing those same like white supremacists, like heteropatriarchal norms. Yeah, yeah, you know, we have to be objective, right? And, you know, we treat our clients with unconditional positive regard. But at the same time, I think it's also our duty. It's like that teacher's oath, you know, that they take that they are what is it like preachers of truth or like they make their promise their oath to truth telling. I think therapists should be the same way.
yeah, I think so too. But and also I think that therapists have to understand that they also have their own
Yeah.
biases about, you know, and like for me, even today, there was a program in Syracuse where they had students of color, minority students, get into uh, Colgate, which is where I went, and they picked only two students, right? One student who I know is a very good friend of mine. Shout out to Kiana. She's from Syracuse, and she's Black African American, and then me. And I know that he advocated for me. And so it's interesting because there were both headwinds and tailwinds in that situation as well. And I never thought about it until today, right? So imagine, like, I've been doing all this work thinking about myself and trying to figure out where I fit, especially, you know, given you know, the uprisings, the protests, like all this stuff. How do you, like, where do you stand, and how are you trying to again, like, taking care of yourself, understanding your own self and your own process with all of this, and then how do you kind of be able to advocate and recognize that other people have their own experiences that we have to validate and understand, but then we have our experiences that we can see that have impacted us personally, and but then also systematically. So interesting to be thinking about, and to also try to get other people to think about without necessarily invalidating their own beliefs, because it's so hard when you believe something. And we know this from, like, having core beliefs about ourselves, right, that we often try to nudge out of people, because oftentimes those core beliefs are that they don't feel good about themselves, or they're not good enough, or whatever it is. So
bringing awareness, creating these little snippets, interviews. I think it's, you know, you're putting it out there for people to see.
yeah, well, I think we're all just trying to do the best that we can in many ways, and sometimes it's hard to see the bigger picture when you're just, like, in survival mode, right? When you're just trying to feel better. It's hard to see that, like, look, we're all a part of this human experience. And like you said about earlier, like, you know, you're not a nationalist because, you know, internationally, like, we're all experiencing the human struggle and human experience, and how do we kind of support each other in that, because the tendency is to go back to my primary needs, like keeping this physical body alive. And that's what it ends up happening, is sometimes, you know, the brain is such an interesting tool in many ways. Like, it reverts back to primal, like, urges and impulses, especially when shit goes down. And so you have to implement that prefrontal cortex to really stop and think, right? It goes back to that trigger reaction. It's like trigger, reaction, understanding it, and then response.
Humans are stuck in an island. They're gonna work together to survive. They're not gonna try to kill each other off, right? I
Right.
think that's also a primitive thing. But like under capitalism, they make us they instill their ideas that the human is greedy, the human is individualistic, um, and I think that's when I know I'm probably starting to get burnt out. When
Mm.
I start feeling cynical.
That's a really good point, because, you know, it is true. There is a Darwinism, so to speak, in capitalism, and the school of life. I don't know if you follow it at all. He has this great, Alain de Botton is a philosopher from the school of life, and he has this great talk on capitalism. I can't remember what it's called, but it's a TED talk, and he talks about, like, if there are winners, then therefore there are losers, and how, like, losing in life, and particularly in American society and Western society, which is also very complicated, because we've talked about this before, like the colonization of our brains that have happened from early on to now, and how like really reevaluating that narrative of what is, even like with research studies, like Western capitalist societies gets kind of perpetuated. And even with my example that I just said about how the brain works, you're so right in the fact that the brain also works in a way, in an altruistic way, even more so than in a way of being self-oriented.
Which then again, you go back and you see like, okay, what are the the uprisings fighting for? What are their slogans? And then you see the counter protest, right? I need my haircut. I need this, but that just that's something
I don't need to
deeper.
wear a mask because,
Yeah,
it's my constitutional right.
like Herman Cain. Huh?
Really sad because that on so many levels was so fucked up. Because here he is, a black man entrepreneur who has been successful given the system, right? And what is and was at a higher risk for actually dying from COVID because of that same system.
Well, it depends, but again, asking yourself, what was he upholding?
Complicated, so complicated. So is there anything that you think would be important to tell everybody as you're, as we're kind of coming to a close?
Understanding that we each have our own role, and but not to beat up ourselves, right? To remember to be compassionate to ourselves, kind to ourselves, and forgiving. And forgiving doesn't really, like Ruth King said, it's not really about, saying that the other person understands me now. It's more
Right.
about forgiving yourself for allowing to react to that person. The opportunity, support your local grassroots organizations. Instagram is kind of like a tool that could be used to find like grassroots organizations. You could check out like their history, how they've been like, allocating the funds, and that I think we have to keep pushing forward. And I hope that we could, there's this collective consciousness or like collective unconsciousness that we're feeling it now. And I think like there's a shift, there's a global shift, and I think, surround yourself by like-minded people, but also speak up when you see something that's not right.
Mm-hmm.
And take care of yourself, right? We, the individual, are the greatest weapon against, tyranny, racism, homophobia, transphobia, and that take care of yourself so that you can help others.
Right. And that's well said. Well said. So as we're getting off the A train, how can people reach you? How can they get in contact with you?
Well, I mean, I would suggest, like following, different. I don't know. You can tag me here, but it's like
I will if that's okay.
it's my personal page. But I do like my associations with like NIMCA, like the New York Metro Mental Health Counseling Association.
Okay.
Uh, and my government, which is like Danny Sanchez. That's my name. Um, but yeah. And through the wellness psychotherapy page.
Yes. Yes. You're active at, which I appreciate. You make comments. We're so fortunate that you decided to go towards the career as opposed to the stability and the impact that you've been having on not only the clients that you work with, but just like in the organizations that you work with, but just like everybody. Important to have an awareness and a consciousness on both levels, right? Macro and micro. And you definitely incorporate that in all that you do.
I enjoy this and definitely miss these conversations during supervision.
I know, I know. Well, this is the selfishness. Well, or maybe the altruism actually within me. A combination of both, right? I like miss you guys so much and like just like connecting interpersonally because we would have such great conversations. And then I also want to be able to kind of get out there all the conversations that we've had towards like for other people to experience it because I think it's so important, so important, especially like again like we just said about people having ideas about what therapy is and who therapists are, and there's like so many of us where we come in all different shapes, sizes, colors, orientations, so of political views, of all kinds of things. Thank you so much for coming and being on. I appreciate it.
And likewise, thank you for your invitation. These conversations were good, and I think that's needed. Continue to publish, and and get the word out there. Thank you for having me.